Welcome to the author storytelling portion of Storytelling Across Media with Comic-Con International and the Comic-Con International Museum. I'm Maryelizabeth Yturralde of Creating Conversations Bookstore in Southern California. And our authors today are going to be discussing curiosity, creativity, craft, and compulsion. And I'm going to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order because that's what booksellers do. So, when she's not adding to her keeper shelf, Annabeth Albert is a multi-published Pacific Northwest romance writer. Her popular LGBTQ+ romances include several fan favorite and critically acclaimed series. She lives with her spouse and 2 children in Oregon. To find out what she's working on next, as well as other fun extras, check out her website or connect with her on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. And I will also share that thanks to her publisher, I have my convention badge for her newest work, Conventionally Yours. And next we have Dr. Katie Mack. She is an theoretical astrophysicist exploring a range of questions in cosmology, the study of the universe from beginning to end. So she basically has tackled the biggest story of any of our participants. She is currently an assistant professor of physics at North Carolina State University, where she is also a member of Leadership in Public Science Cluster. She's been published in a number of popular publications, such as Scientific American, Slate, Sky and Telescope, Time, and Cosmos magazine, where she's a columnist. She can be found on Twitter as Astro Katie. And fellow California native, Bethany C. Morrow, is a sometimes expat hovering between Montreal, Quebec, and the American Northeast. She graduated from the University of California, Santa Cruz, with a BA in sociology and studied clinical psychological research at the University of Wales, Bangor, before focusing on her writing. A Song Below Water is her debut standalone young adult and an instant indie bestseller. She's also the editor of and contributor to the young adult anthology, Take the Mic, and the author of the adult speculative literary novel, Mack. And best-selling author Diana Quincy is an Emmy-nominated former television journalist who decided she'd rather make up stories where a happy ending is always guaranteed in the Regency world of dashing dukes, irresistible rogues, and the bold women who capture their hearts. As a U.S. Foreign Service brat, Diana grew up roaming the world, but is now happily settled in Virginia with her husband and 2 sons. When not bent over her laptop or trying to keep up with laundry, she enjoys reading, spending time with her family, and dreaming up her next travel adventure. Diana loves to hear from readers, and her latest is Her Night with the Duke. And Rebecca Roanhorse. Rebecca is the New York Times bestselling author of Trail of Lightning, Storm of Locusts, Star Wars, Resistance Reborn, and Race to the Sun. She's won the Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Awards for her fiction and was the recipient of the 2018 Astounding Award for Best New Writer. Black Sun is out now in October because this is being recorded, but I believe it'll be out by the time it's aired. And she lives in New Mexico with her family. And I was remiss because I missed the title of Dr. Katie's book, which is The End of Everything. So the first question that I have for each of you is, what makes a story speak to you, and what was the compelling story in your current work? And Dr. Katie, why don't we start with you, because this seems like a important question when you're tackling the entire life of the universe.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on this panel. I'm really happy to be here and talking to all you wonderful storytellers. For me, I think that what makes the story that I'm trying to tell compelling is that it does have a beginning, middle, and end. You know, we're talking about the whole cosmos, and we think of it as just the place we live, but there was a beginning of the universe, and we can see what that looked like by looking out into the distance in the cosmos and seeing the traces of the Big Bang. And we can see how the universe has been evolving and changing over time and becoming a very different place. And we can speculate about what the end of that story is. And I think what makes it meaningful to me is that we as people, we long for that narrative. We want to understand how everything fits together and how we fit into a story. And we want to know what the beginning was, and we want to know what the ending is going to be like, because somehow that makes it more meaningful to us to know what that whole narrative looks like. And so it was fun for me to write a book about the end of the universe, because I think that's part of the story that we don't hear very often. And we hear a lot more about the beginning and about how the cosmos works or whatever in various kinds of science writing. But putting it all together as a story that has a beginning, middle, and end was something I thought would be really fun, and was kind of a nice challenge, and I think something that can help people feel more connected to the cosmos, because we are part of that story ourselves.
Excellent. Rebecca, do you want to go next? Because you have some elements of established power bases beginning and ending. So maybe that's a segue.
Yeah. So I just have to say it's kind of early for me. So I'm still working on coffee. My brain is still kicking in. So please be patient with me as I try to figure out answers to things. Actually, I'm going to say that what drives me to story, or what attracts me to story, is character. I am always looking for compelling characters, and from character, plot comes and setting comes and all of those things that make a story complete. But I'm always sort of starting with character, and definitely, in Black Sun, it is about sort of end of the world in a certain way. It's Black Sun is a big epic fantasy set in pre-Columbian inspired Americas, or pre-Columbian Americas, inspired by pre-Columbian Americas, sorry. But it is fantasy, it's not history. But there are, forces at work, political alignment shifting, gods coming back, being reborn. And so things are definitely changing for the characters, and they really have to figure out, what their destiny is, and what their place is in this new world. And so, yeah, we'll go with that.
And Bethany, you also have characters trying to figure out what their destiny is. Was that sort of what first brought you to A Song Below Water, or what was sort of your kickoff to want to tell that story?
I feel like everyone will have heard some variation of this by this point, so apologies. But there was a moment on Twitter, because everything starts on Twitter, where I said to my sister, "My voice is power." And I was talking about this. We were watching a Black woman be completely abused in real time, and she would go on to be doxxed and leave the internet and have all of her personal information shared because she dared to disagree with some white guy. So I said it to her, and immediately, as soon as I said it, I was like, that's something a siren would say. And then I said, only Black women are sirens. And that's pretty much it. That's A Song Below Water. That's where you start, because it wasn't a statement of a lack of power. It was a statement of your endless power, and how upsetting in your circumstance, and after everything this world has tried to do to you, for you to dare to persist, and for you to dare to continue to have the cultural impact that you have, makes your life unsafe. So I agree with Rebecca. I love character, and I'm driven by character. I do tend to think that for me, character and concept sort of combust into existence for me at the same time. And if they don't, it's not the right character, because I've always said I shouldn't be able to take any of my characters from any other book and place them in another one. If I can do that, they're not true to that world. They're not true to that story. They're not required for that story. And more than anything, I feel like my character should always be the most interesting person in the world I'm talking about. And that doesn't mean according to the status quo, and it certainly doesn't mean it's according to whoever the power majority might be, but realistically and literally, they need to be the most interesting person in that world. So it was definitely just an instantaneous understanding that Black women are sirens, that it makes the most sense, having, you know, been force-fed mythology all of my life. It literally made more sense than everything else. And I think that that's what contemporary fantasy allows, as particularly Black storytellers to do, is not make up a world, but we have to stay in reality. We have to see reality. And part of our job of storytelling is illuminating what's already actually real to people who seem to be unfamiliar with it. So that's a lot of, I mean, that's the thrust of A Song Below Water.
Thank you. Annabeth, do you want to sort of pick up on that and talk about some of the power of contemporary storytelling and what stories compel you?
Yeah, like Rebecca and Bethany, character does a lot. But I was thinking about what really compels me is a moment. That's where the story starts, is a moment in time when everything is about to change. And it can look like a really ordinary day to anyone else. It can look like just, you know, they're eating their breakfast, something's happening, but everything is about to change. And when I have that moment, the story just kind of goes from there. And I love finding people at that time in their life when things are changing, things are uncertain, and they're still figuring out who they are. And they could be 40, they could be 23, like conventionally yours, but it's that moment when they are about to change and they're about to come into themselves and they're about to have some really big realizations. And when I feel that realization, where we're going to end up, then I can see the path that we're going to go along. And I love that. I get so excited.
Awesome. All right, Diana, I have deliberately left you to the end because it made sense to me to move to you at the end, because the whole point of romance, although this also applies to Annabeth, is the happily ever after. So besides getting to that point, what compels you?
So my book, this is my book cover. I've written maybe 11 or 12 books. Some are romance, some are historical mystery. And of course, there is a formula for romance and for mystery. And it always ends, like you said, with a happily ever after. This character, this heroine, is half Arab. So in a world that is overwhelmingly white, which is historical romance, and all my other characters in all the previous books were white. So I really wanted to bring a marginalized character to be the heroine in this one. And that's what drove me here. I mean, I love the elements of romance. I love, going into those rabbit holes for research. I'm sure it's fiction, but the readers will get you if you play with history. If a flower blooms in the wrong season, you're going to hear from readers. And so I really wanted to introduce a character. I mean, I think there are a lot of stereotypes. You don't see a lot of Arab characters in literature or in anywhere unless they're terrorists or evil people or oil sheiks or have a harem. And certainly when you think about an Arab woman, you think about someone who, is subjugated, not strong, not kick-ass, downtrodden by the evil men in her family. So that's what I was trying to bring. It's a traditional romance. It has all the elements that readers look for in historical romance, but I've added a character who is a little different, and it adds a layer and context to this story. And definitely she takes care of herself. And so I'm glad to add an Arab character into the narrative who shakes up the stereotypes that people might have. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I mean, obviously, having that representation was part of what compelled you to tell this particular story. Perfect answer. So I'm going to go ahead and start with you in response to my next question, which is talking about tools of the craft. So what are some of the tools of storytelling and writing that you particularly like to employ to make sure that the reader is as engaged and compelled by the story as you are?
Tools. What do you mean by tools specifically?
Like, do you like to use descriptives? Do you like to work on, what do you do to hook a reader?
Well, I'm a journalist by trade. And I've covered real stories that you wouldn't believe that were real, but they were. So I'm often motivated by true stories, and they often are the germ that makes the book. So a lot of my books are my mystery, for example. This is one of my mysteries. That was the idea for that came from a real story about a duke who purchased a woman who was being sold by her husband. So these kinds of things did happen. I mean, you remained legally married, but your husband would sell you away. So in this case, the duke bought this woman, claimed he did not have an affair with her. But when his wife died, when his duchess died, he married her and made her his duchess. So, and that's in the record. So it was very fun to go and look at what they'd written, what people had written about them. I found it extremely compelling. So, that was sort of the germ that started this murder mystery. And the husband who sells away the wife is the one who's murdered. So, very much rooted in real life, in real historical facts. And then I put my own twist on them. I think pacing is very important. In a historical romance, everybody kind of knows what they're going to get. It's really the journey to get there. So I think all of my books have twists in them. They don't quite go, because you know where you're going to end up. I want to take people on a ride before they get there. So.
Excellent. Annabeth, that seems like a good transition to you.
Yeah. Like Diana, I love research. That often augments what I do, but to really hook readers, I think it comes down to dialogue for me. That banter, the back and forth, that's what we expect from romance. It's what's fun to write. If the dialogue layer is there, everything else seems to kind of fall in place. And so dialogue, and I work on my dialogue. I work on being snappy, being true, each character having a unique voice when they're bantering back and forth. And the other trick that I kind of use is little hooks, because like Diana was saying, with romance, you have expected beats. We know that they're going to have a kiss. We know that they're going to fall a little bit more in love. We know that they might have a hurdle along the way. But you can make that your own with how you handle the scene opening hooks and the scene ending hooks, as we kind of get them hooked for what the next beat is going to be. And having them be unique to that character, kind of what Bethany and Rebecca were saying a little while ago, the character does drive the dialogue and those little hooks. And if it's unique for that character, then to me, you have a really compelling story, and the pacing will take care of itself, because you know that those beats are going to come in. I'm a big plotter. I know where those beats are going to hit. But the dialogue is where the surprises come, and the dialogue is also, I think, where you're going to really hook your reader. So that's kind of the two tricks that really kind of come to mind for me.
Awesome. Thank you. Bethany, do you want to sort of tackle this one and talk about how you get people to engage, people who might be like, I have no identification with the life of teenagers growing up in Portland?
Yeah, I think that everybody always asks, like, oh, do you write what you write because you studied sociology? And I say I studied sociology because of who I am as a person, which is somebody who is very, very observant. I will also say intuitive as well, because it's observing things that people don't want you to notice. So I think that my level of observation just naturally goes into my work. It's the way that people give themselves away or give away pieces of their story. It's also something I find very natural to just the way that humans sort of have their own internal narration of their life and their own sort of their self-image that doesn't always quite match who they actually are and the things that they're actually doing. And so I tend to write very, in some ways, stream of consciousness. It sort of weaves around like what is really happening, what the character thinks is happening, what they think is relevant to what they're doing, and what they bring up at what time. So if you read like my my debut adult novel Mem, which is all about an actual sort of living memory, it was actually the easiest one for me to write because it's the way that I think about story in the first place, which is that nobody just goes down a straight line. And it was very fun to do because she herself is a memory, and it was an aspect of her characterization that she couldn't just be in the moment that she was in without it sort of weaving in something that had happened before, something that happened before she knew who she was, and just different aspects of her life. And that was also fun because it was also historical. It was set in between 1906 and like 1925 in sort of alternate Montreal, alternate scientifically, basically, because of this ability to extract memories. So I do find that cognition and like my belief and understanding of the way that we cognitively sort of see ourselves and express ourselves very much is a part of my craft of putting it on the page. And I think the thing that sort of connects all of my work, because of course I've written speculative literary adult fiction and contemporary fantasy and historical young adult that's coming out next year, and then sort of a social horror. The thing that always connects to my work again is that illumination, like trying to illumine something to people who are literally doing life with me, are literally living in the same country or in the same world as me, and then again pretending that they are just completely unaware of certain things. And so my work is always going to be indicting. It's always going to be, I don't actually have to explain this to you. And the more that I write about this and the way that I write about it is basically going to call you to account for acting like this is new news to you. That's something that happened a lot this summer, of course, when A Song Below Water came out, which I haven't shown you, and it's so beautiful. Sort of came up a lot this summer because of part of something that happens in the book is that a Black woman who has been murdered by her partner is just publicly maligned, and suddenly it becomes, okay, how could this kind of have been her fault? And because the person's on trial and the defense is basically saying, well, the woman was a siren. And if that's true, then maybe that just explains everything. And the feedback that I got a lot was people saying, I can't believe I didn't see this. And because a book can get you there, I kind of am like, me too. I also can't believe that. So it's basically saying like, let's be more interrogating, let's be really honest. And that's what I always want my work to do. So however I can, all of the different tools that I use to indict the society that I live in, be it research, be it dialogue, be it sort of a cerebral, cognitive way of weaving a story and demonstrating a character's motivations.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump from your comment about observation and go to Dr. Katie next, because I feel like observing the universe is probably the core of your work. And so what tools do you use to make sure that people are as excited about our place in the universe, in space and time, as you are?
So I think the biggest tool I use is just my own excitement. So in writing my book, I put in a lot of jokes and gleeful footnotes and all caps sections and things where there's something really weird about the universe, and I just want to talk about how weird that is and how cool that is. So I definitely don't hold back on the kind of writing that is kind of rare in physics writing, where people are just unconstrainedly gleeful about the universe. So that's I think how I try and get people excited, just that I am overflowing with my own excitement, and I want to share that with others. I was thinking about what everybody was saying about character, and I do have a few stories in my writing, not just in this book, but in other science writing, where I talk about the stories of people who made discoveries and all of that. But I think the main thing that I try and get across in terms of story, in terms of characters, is how we come to these kinds of conclusions, how we learn about the cosmos, how we take just a bunch of data or observations and are able to say something about the universe. And that process of discovery, of testing ideas, it's very much like a kind of mystery solving situation, right? And so you gather clues, and you come up with ideas, and you argue about them. And there are some people who will have an idea, and then other people will disagree with it strongly. And I try and throw in some of those stories when I can, because I think that it's really useful for people to understand how we learn about the cosmos, and how that is a human endeavor, and that is subject to all the human failings that we have. And we do sometimes come to wrong conclusions because of the biases we have, or the way that we talk to each other, and that kind of thing. So there is that human element in it, that I do try and I put in there, when it's appropriate, and when it sort of brings the story along. So there are a few places in my writing in general where I really try and say, look, we're talking about physics, we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about astronomy, but we're people, and we're doing this as people, and we have a human way of approaching this, and that's, I think, an important thing to talk about.
Thank you. And Rebecca, we're wrapped back to you. Hopefully you've had a little more coffee. So you want to talk about tools of the craft, whether you're sharing, people's experiences running around the Star Wars galaxy, or something closer to home in, Central America.
Yeah. So I use everything I've got, like whatever I can, hook people in with. So definitely characterization, pacing, dialogue. I'll tell you, as a reader, I often just read the dialogue. So I'm one of those terrible people that setting is really long for me. So it's always a struggle. So I'm definitely looking at dialogue to pull me in. And I think generally for me, I am a big proponent of the hook, like the opening of a book. And Danielle Clayton, who's a wonderful YA author, once described my work as the drop of blood in a glass of champagne. And I am going to go with that. So I love an opening chapter, a hook. Often I do incorporate violence into that, to pull you into the story, to immediately invest you in a character's fate, and sort of what's going to happen to them. And hopefully that means a reader can not turn the page, that they need to know what happens next. So it's really that driving opening that I focus on.
And that actually makes a nice transition into my next question, assuming that you're not just reading the dialogue, that you're reading some of the setting, which is, what are some of the ways that you share what might be considered esoteric or specialty knowledge? Dr. Katie touched on this a little bit, whether it's gaming etiquette, astrophysics, regional vernaculars, Regency publishing practices, or, historical nautical know-how, which kind of goes right back to you, Rebecca.
I just throw the reader in, honestly. It's one of, in my first series, in the Six World series, it's set in a near future Navajo Nation. And I use a lot of Navajo language, and I, I'm pretty sure that most people don't speak Navajo, so there is a learning curve. But I did not define those words for anyone. I did not put them in italics. I said, hey, especially for fantasy readers, if you can learn Elvish and you can learn Klingon, you can learn a little bit of Navajo. It won't hurt you. So that's sort of my approach generally. Yeah, and in Black Sun, you're right. I pull a lot from the Maritime Maya. So I really focus. There's a whole sea journey, but it's unlike the sort of sea journey you might be used to if you're reading European epic fantasy. And I just expect readers to adapt. I don't really hold your hand. And mostly that works. Most people are down for it. And I think particularly in the genre of fantasy, people are willing to allow you to lead them, as long as there's a payoff in the end, as long as they're attached to those characters, like I keep coming back to, that you could actually get away with a lot.
Excellent. Bethany, do you want to take it next? How do you drop those pieces of knowledge?
Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest reasons that it's the term is slightly getting convoluted at this point, but what I consider own voice representation, but one of the reasons that it is so important is because I don't have to try. I am actually living this double bind. This is actually my native tongue. So I've talked about this before. I love what Rebecca just said. I agree with everything she just said, obviously, particularly about not holding people's hands, not having a glossary. I have literally had people ask whether I would consider having footnotes. And we're talking about American readers asking me in a book about Black American girls if I will, have footnotes so that when they say things that they don't understand, I basically will cater to them. And of course, no, in no universe is that ever going to happen. One of the things that I've talked about extensively, again on Twitter, is that there's this, what we have allowed, the power majority to sort of define as being their preference. It's actually a complete illiteracy and a cultural incompetence where there's one type of character I understand, and there's one type of story I understand, and there's one type of motivation that I understand. And we're going to sort of hold creators hostage to that. And my thing is, you have to do exactly what you do when you're teaching your child to speak, which is you speak to your child. When you're teaching literally anyone, when you're teaching anyone anything, and we're talking about just the foundational sort of building blocks of communication for somebody who previously has never been able to understand or express themselves, there is no magic pill. You literally just do it. So representation is extremely important for that reason. And I do not ever center the expected narrative or the quote unquote default characters in my stories for that reason, because people need to become literate and they need to have their competency tested and stretched. And I need to have my humanity intact. So I'm not going to give you little clues that this isn't normal for you, I'm sorry. I'm just going to write what is reality, and you will catch up or you won't.
Well, and I will say that, we're also living in the age of the internet. I mean, I could hold up my phone and show you, I'm not going to attempt to recall at 8:30 in the morning what the term was for the beverage that Rebecca had in Black Sun, but I'm like, what are they drinking? Type. Information. I don't have to go pester the person who wrote this or look at a glossary, but there could be times a glossary could be helpful. Katie.
Yeah, I mean, in physics, I think it's a little bit of a different situation because it is such extremely specialized knowledge, and it's nothing to do with anybody's lived experience. It's stuff that you learn in graduate school in a course. So there are times when I do have to very carefully define words and put things into a context that is closer to people's experience and into a language that is more accessible, not just to people with very specialized knowledge. But I also do, I do expect the reader to put in some effort. So I don't, a lot of science writing is very much like, lead you by the hand through every little piece of the story and define absolutely everything as you're going. And my writing is somewhere in the middle where, it's okay if you have to stop and read the paragraph again for it to really sink in. And I don't mind that. And I've had editors for some of my previous science writing who would not allow that. Like, if you can't just read it through all in one, in one breath, then it's too hard and you have to go through it. And I was very happy with writing my own book that I didn't have to do that. I could say, like, look, yeah, this is a hard concept. This is theoretical physics. It's going to take some thinking. You're going to have to stop and sit with it. And I thought that was okay. And I think sometimes that kind of sitting and contemplating and coming to the conclusion yourself and, really having that moment of epiphany is super helpful and super useful and can be very empowering for a reader who might have, at a glance thought, this is too hard, this is too complicated, I can't get this. And then going through it and sitting for it with a moment and saying, oh, actually, I do get that. Like, I think that can be a very valuable experience. And I wanted to allow people to have that experience in my writing.
And I will say that was kind of my experience with it. It probably took me as long to read your book as it did to read the other 4 combined. So Annabeth, you want to talk a little bit about how you do walk that margin, say, between writing something that's authentic to experienced gamers and also giving gaming experience that's not going to kick the people who are just there for the love story out of the story?
Yeah, I think it's all about balance. And for me, if I have a long descriptive part that's that's big explanation, that's taking away from the romance, it's taking away from the story, it's taking away from the character. And so it's all about, what does the character know in that moment? What do they know? And I have all sorts of little gaming tidbits because I'm a gamer. I've been gaming for years and I want to get all those tidbits in there, but that's irrelevant. What does the character need in that moment? What are they seeing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking about? And then if they're thinking about a term that maybe the non-gamers wouldn't know, then I will give some context clues. But again, it's not a glossary, it's not a dictionary, but I want to give little external clues. Okay, he's defending. That means that there was an attack, like little clues. But I try and kind of keep it centered in the character. What does the character know? What do they need in that moment? And if we're in an unfamiliar setting, like mine takes place on a road trip, and the temptation is to describe everything in St. Louis, say, no, that's irrelevant. What are they seeing in that exact moment? What do they need, and how can those little details enhance characterization? That's what it always comes back to me.
Fantastic. And Diana, you're dealing with a number of different things that you have to share with readers beyond the love story. You've got Regency publishing habits. You've got the incorporation of, no, there was nothing except for white Anglo-Saxon people living in England at that time. How do you work all that in?
Well, I feel like I need to have an extended conversation with Bethany and Rebecca because, this is my first marginalized character. I've written, I can pass, if you will. And I adopted a white pen name, if you will, and a waspy pen name. So, because when I started writing, it didn't even occur to me to write a marginalized character in this world. And yet when I wrote this one, it seemed very natural. But it also was about tapping into that stuff that I had actually sublimated, right, in my writing. So this whole discussion about whether or not to italicize the words. My critique partner, who was white, is like, don't italicize them. And I'm thinking, well, it is a non-native language. It is a foreign language. Shouldn't I italicize it? So the reader knows this is an English book, and Bethany and Rebecca are different in that theirs is a native language, right? So, I mean, these are all kind of discussions to be had. And so in terms of the half Arab, the Anglo-Arab character, it was in her cussing in Arabic, or something that people who speak another language do all the time, which is talk in your language so that people around you don't know what you're saying about them. And so that happens in the book. And so I do incorporate some of that fun stuff in terms of, bad words. And I do explain it to the reader, but, maybe I shouldn't be, I don't know. So, I mean, these are all things to think about, right? So in terms of the character, I really want, I do have to sort of explore both sides of her. One of my beta readers said, well, you see her embracing her Arab side. What did she miss about England? Did she miss some of the food, or, some of the vistas when she was traveling? So I think that was important too, because we're very well rounded. We're not just one way. So in the character for her, I did it in sometimes what she wears, what she says, what she eats, what she craves, how she reacts, down to her name. So, and then there's that, like you said, that wider Regency world that's very important in terms of creating that setting. And that is, the mores, you can't, you shouldn't have premarital sex. You're going to be cut. You can't leave the house if you're a young woman without a chaperone. All those things are integral to the setting of the story. And then the part about publishing, I obviously had to research that. To see, women often did not publish in their own names because women writers were not taken seriously. And, she has a hard time getting what she thinks she's worth. So all of those things are integral to creating a setting that is true to the genre, but also introducing something new in the genre that maybe they haven't seen before.
Awesome, thank you. So my next question is sort of going to encapsulate some of your own personal reading experiences, and or they may have been stories that you were introduced to in other ways than reading. But I was going to ask each one of you to talk about a story that you have found compelling that is not one that you have chosen to tell. So Diana, do you want to go ahead and go?
Yes. Well, I just finished, and so it's really on my mind. I just finished listening to Michelle Obama's Becoming, and I want it in print because there are so many passages in there that are illuminating, enlightening, and I hadn't really thought of. And she puts in all the fun stuff like what the White House is like and all that. But there was so much. I mean, that's from a perspective as a Black woman that she put in there that really made me, I mean, just talking about the difficulties of integrating when she went to Princeton and how the pressure that is put on the Black students to integrate when they're already in an environment where, she came from a neighborhood where everybody looked like her. And she was suddenly in an environment where almost nobody looked like her. And she got a lot of, and it was just enlightening how she noticed how the white men in class had all this, had all this confidence where she was probably smarter than them, but didn't have that same kind of confidence. And it was just such an interesting journey for me to hear her and to hear her read it. I just found it compelling, and it was so much more to me than a memoir. And so that's what I've just finished listening to and has been in my mind a lot lately. And it was so entertaining, but also so impactful. And I I just really enjoyed it, and I would recommend whoever hasn't read it or listened to it to, put it on their list.
Thank you very much. Rebecca.
Sorry, I was expecting to go last, but so yeah, I'm gonna actually pick a book that I just read, Legend Born by Tracy Deonn. She's a YA author, and this was her debut that hit the New York Times. So congratulations to her. This is on the surface, it's a retelling of the Arthurian legend, the story of Arthur and his knights, but the protagonist is a young Black girl. And what Tracy does with this sort of very European legend is turn it into a uniquely American story by incorporating Black Southern history and the history of the enslaved, and creating sort of this magic system that I thought was just beautiful and brilliant, and playing with the tropes of young adult fiction in a really unique way within the Arthurian story. And I just thought it was creative and smart and just shows what happens when you bring sort of marginalized voices into the center, and play with what may be familiar stories to people in a uniquely different way. It brings a different perspective, and it's often creative and surprising and just really entertaining. So Tracy Deonn, Legend Born.
Thank you. Annabeth.
Yes. One of the best things that I've read recently is Adriana Herrera's Finding Joy. And it really changed how I look at romance. And I've been reading romance since I was 12. Like, I love romance. It's my genre. It's in my blood. But when I read her book, it takes place in Ethiopia between two like Peace Corps type workers. And I was like, the only person who could tell this story is Adriana. She is the person who's best centered and able to tell this romance. And her voice just absolutely sings from that place that she is the best person to tell the story. And everything that I've read since then and everything that I've thought about with my own work has come back to that notion. And so it's a fabulous love story. It's one of the best romances I've read recently. But that notion of who can tell it, that's something that's lingered with me for months after I read it in June. And so I absolutely recommend the book, but also its perspective for me as a writer. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Katie.
Yeah, so when I read for pleasure, I usually read science fiction, and moreover, I usually read books that involve spaceships because I consider it to be sufficiently escapist if there is a spaceship involved. So it's it's a good kind of metric. And recently there are a couple of sort of series that I've been rereading that both involve spaceships and are just really, really good storytelling. And they're books that I recommend to everybody I know. So one of them is the a book called Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie, which is it's a series of 3 novels. That's the first one, and it's people talk about it a lot because it does interesting things with gender. So it has some interesting ideas about how people talk about gender and conceptualize it, and I like that a lot. But it's also just it's an interesting story about kind of how you conceptualize who you are and how your actions connect with how you think about yourself. So it's centered on an artificial intelligence, and that person's, or person, if you think about them as a person, how they interact with the world in different ways. And it's a really wonderful storytelling. And the second one I want to mention is the Murderbot series by Martha Wells, which also involves spaceships and AIs, and centers on the story of a person that is a kind of AI/human melded kind of being, and and also has that same kind of thread of what is it to really be a person, and how do you conceptualize who you are, and how you interact with other people, and are you really your experiences, or how you think of yourself. And I mentioned those two because they're very different kind of tone, very different in sort of plot, and the main characters are very different, but the main thread that goes through all of it is this question of identity and how you conceptualize yourself. And I love when science fiction can bring out those kinds of themes and connect with, how we think about ourselves and how we treat each other and how we fit into society by going into a totally different sort of universe where the rules are different and the technology is different and everything is different. I love that way of building a world and connecting with people.
Also, there's much less tea in the Murderbot books, but they're both excellent. All right, Bethany, your compelling stories from someone else that you would like to share.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to be the bad author and not talk about a book because something that has just been extremely important to me that I think it's going to take me a very long time to get over is HBO's adaptation of Watchmen, and in particular the first episode, which of course just shows, like literally just shows the Tulsa massacre, and it's not only because it was so, for me, perfectly done on a character level, on a plot level, on a revelation level. It's because to me it follows the mission of speculative fiction, which is it's a Trojan horse basically for truth, for reality, for change. And again, sociologically, we understand that entertainment has never just been entertainment. We know that that's not what it's for. We are always, everything has a quote unquote agenda. It's the purpose is to, either replicate, perpetuate, or, again, interrogate society and to socialize people to continue to believe or to shift in their thinking. And so I think that the first episode of Watchmen for me was so stunning because it didn't have to use very much speculative elements. And when you're showing people the abject truth that has been completely ignored or intentionally erased, it was shocking to people. And okay, it wasn't shocking for me because, we have our own curriculum as Black Americans, the same as Indigenous Americans and anyone who has been here long enough to know for a fact that their history is being left out intentionally or being misrepresented. And so I have a book coming out next year that is a historical fiction. I call it a remix of Little Women, called So Many Beginnings, and it takes place in 1863, and it takes place on Roanoke Island and in the Free People's Colony. And I say So Many Beginnings, My Little Women remix, is to Little Women as the first episode of Watchmen is to history. It's yes, this is a well-loved property that is going to draw a lot of people to it, a lot of people are going to be excited about. And because you're coming, I'm going to tell you the part of history that you did not want to remember. So My Little Women is very much about what this time period would have been like for previously enslaved and sometimes currently enslaved people under the eye of the Union, and what that would actually be like, and how we actually would talk about what we as Americans like to consider these two sides, this like Confederate versus Union, and is that the way it looked to everybody else? So that to me, Watchmen, not just that episode, but very specifically that episode, because it's sort of the happy ending is that immediately you saw school curriculums actually impacted in the state of Oklahoma, which is where it took place, that had never taught the Tulsa massacre. And once you have it up there on the screen in this ridiculously popular and engaging story, and people go, is this real? Did this actually happen? Now you have no choice. Now you have no excuse. Why haven't you been teaching that? So you see the very next school year, suddenly the Oklahoma state curriculum involves and includes the Tulsa massacre. So that Trojan horse effect of entertainment, of especially speculative fiction, is extremely, extremely important to me. But it was just so overwhelming for me, the entire series. It was so well done. It was Regina King is my actual king. So I could not get over it. I don't think that I'm probably ever going to get over it.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so much. I now have additions to my reading and my viewing list. I'm probably going to start with Legendborn because I got it during the time that I was doing my quote unquote homework for this panel. I was like, oh, this looks awesome, but must finish for panel prep. So thank you all so much for your time and for spending time with me today, and for spending time with the Storytelling Across Media viewers and the Comic-Con International audience. And take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.